The forest had always been his refuge, a quiet place where the noise of the world could no longer reach him. For years, he'd wandered its trails looking for peace among the whispering pines and the steady rhythm of his own breath. But this time felt different. The hiker moved with the weight of someone who had given up on returning. Days later, searchers found his pack, his footprints leading toward a weathered cabin that hadn't seen life in decades. Inside, the air was cold, the hearth untouched, and on the walls, strange markings spiraled like prayers written by a restless hand. His journal spoke of a doorway, not of wood or stone, but of stillness, an escape from all pain. What if he truly found it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The journal was the first thing they noticed when they entered the cabin, a small, leather-bound book lying open beside a rusted lantern. Its pages were filled with careful, looping handwriting, faded but readable, as though the writer had known someone would one day come looking. It began with simple observations, weather patterns, notes on the terrain, sketches of trees and streams. But beneath the calm, the tone carried weariness. "The noise follows me," one line read. "Even out here I hear the world humming like a broken wire." Samuel Hale had always found comfort in the wilderness. A retired geologist, he once spent months mapping ridges and cataloging stone formations. After his wife, Miriam, passed, the house they'd built together felt hollow, every clock too loud, every window reflecting a face he no longer recognized. The forest to him was not escape. It was silence shaped into mercy. He left his suburban home one gray morning without telling anyone. The world had grown too heavy with screens, arguments, and the endless chatter of people shouting to be seen. He packed light, a weatherproof coat, a notebook, an old compass that belonged to his father, and enough supplies for a month. Before leaving, he wrote a note for his neighbor, just a single line: "Please don't come looking." The first days on the trail were uneventful. Samuel moved methodically, measuring each step, listening to the crunch of frost underfoot. The forest in early autumn was both dying and alive, a paradox that suited him. In the evenings, he'd light a small fire and write in his journal, describing the color of the sky as it turned violet, the distant call of owls, the taste of cold coffee in a tin mug. But the entries soon shifted. He began writing about dreams. One described a door made of fog standing among the trees. Another mentioned a voice that whispered from beneath running water. "It said there is a place where noise cannot follow," he wrote. "A doorway to peace." Each morning he'd wake unsettled, the dreams fading, but their message lingering. He told himself it was grief, nothing more, a mind too full of loss trying to empty itself through fantasy. Yet as the days stretched on, the notion began to feel less imagined and more remembered. By the third week, Samuel's supplies dwindled, but he didn't turn back. Instead, he moved deeper into unfamiliar ground, following deer paths and narrow ridges that even local hikers avoided. His compass needle began to behave strangely, tugging and wavering as though caught between magnetic storms. When he tried to retrace his steps, the landscape appeared subtly altered, fallen logs he didn't recall, streams that bent differently, moss growing on the wrong side of trees. Still, he pressed on. The deeper he went, the calmer he felt, as though the forest itself were absorbing his sorrow. He began to speak aloud to Miriam, his voice gentle, conversational. "You'd like it here," he'd say, smiling faintly. "Quiet enough for your thoughts to settle." The journal entries during these days became sparse, the handwriting smaller, the tone more detached. The rational man who once measured the world in strata and soil composition now wrote about vibrations and echoes. "The trees hum when I close my eyes," he noted once. "Something beneath the earth hums with them." On what would later be identified as his final dated entry, Samuel wrote only this: "The forest is not empty. It remembers." When searchers later found the cabin and his journal, that sentence would become a point of debate among investigators and locals alike. Some said it was the rambling of a grieving mind. Others swore the woods around that area had always felt different, older somehow, as if watching those who dared to linger too long. For Samuel Hale, the wilderness was never meant as a hiding place. It was a mirror showing him the quiet he longed for, and perhaps something waiting beyond it. The compass had belonged to his father, a solid brass relic with a cracked glass face and an engraving so faint you could barely read the initials. Samuel carried it more out of sentiment than need. It was his father's way of saying, "No man is ever truly lost if he knows how to read the world." That thought echoed in his mind as he moved deeper into the northern range, beyond any marked trail. The air sharpened. Mornings came wrapped in fog that clung to the ground like low smoke. He stopped often to sketch, though his drawings had become less geological and more abstract, lines that spiraled inward, shapes that seemed to repeat themselves. He walked from dawn until dusk, eating sparingly, sleeping beneath the slanted shadow of pines. The forest changed as he did. The calls of birds grew rare, replaced by an almost reverent stillness. There were moments when the only sound was his own breathing, as if the world were holding itself still to listen. By the 6th day of this descent into solitude, Samuel began to feel he was being followed. At first it was small things, a crunch of leaves when he stopped, a flicker of motion just beyond sight. He'd turn sharply and see nothing but a branch swaying. His rational mind, trained by decades of fieldwork, dismissed it as fatigue. But reason eroded with every mile. He came upon a hollow clearing, filled with the remnants of old camps, tin cups half buried in soil, a broken axe handle, and a collapsed tent frame covered in moss. He felt a strange kinship with those who had come before him, wanderers seeking something unnamed. Kneeling by the ashes of a long-dead fire, he found the outline of boot prints hardened in the dirt. They were not his. Night fell before he reached the next ridge. He built a small fire and held the compass in his palm, watching the needle tremble without settling. He whispered into the dark, unsure to whom he spoke. "Are you out there?" The forest gave no answer, only the deep, resonant creak of wood shifting under cold. That night, he dreamt again of the door. This time it stood closer, almost within reach. Behind it was not light, but stillness, a vast and comforting absence. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, breath visible in the freezing air. The compass needle pointed not north, but toward the valley below. He followed it. The path was narrow, winding between stones slick with frost. The trees grew denser, their trunks marked with faint carvings, symbols he couldn't decipher. Some resembled circles intersected by lines. Others looked like open eyes. He traced one with his finger, feeling an odd warmth beneath the bark. At midday, he reached a ridge that overlooked a stream curling through the forest like a silver thread. The air there carried a deep metallic scent, iron and something older. Samuel crouched to fill his flask and noticed something carved into a rock near the bank. "Here begins the quiet." He stood there for a long time, uncertain if the words were meant as a warning or a welcome. By evening, he found an overhang where he could rest. The forest had grown colder, heavier somehow, but it was not an unpleasant weight. It was like the embrace of something vast and wordless. He lit his lantern, its glow soft against the dark. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure reflected in the glass, a shadow standing behind him, still and patient. When he turned, the clearing was empty. Samuel sat in silence for hours, the compass open beside him, the needle spinning slowly as if reluctant to stop. When he finally closed his eyes, he felt an unshakable certainty that he was being guided somewhere. Somewhere he had always known existed, though he could never name it. He wrote in his journal that night, "The forest listens. It remembers more than it reveals." I think my father knew this, even if he never said it aloud. The fire dimmed, the lantern burned low, and the compass needle finally came to rest, pointing once again toward the valley. The morning Samuel found the note pinned to the tree, the air was utterly still. Not even the faintest wind disturbed the leaves. It was the kind of silence that feels deliberate, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. He almost missed the paper at first. It was curled, yellowed, the ink faded but legible. 4 lines written in the same looping hand he'd used in his own journal. The doorway opens when the world turns quiet. He stood there for a long time, reading it again and again, convinced it must have been left by another wanderer. Yet the longer he looked, the more it felt as though he had written it himself. The handwriting was disturbingly familiar. He folded the note carefully and placed it inside his coat pocket, where it seemed to radiate a faint warmth. Following the direction his compass had indicated, Samuel descended into a narrow valley bordered by towering cedars. The deeper he went, the dimmer the light became, as though the sun were reluctant to follow. There was no sound of birds, no trace of insects. Even his footsteps seemed to muffle themselves. By late afternoon, he reached a small clearing and stopped. There, half sunken into the earth, stood the cabin. It was older than anything he'd seen in the forest, built of blackened timber and moss-covered stone, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The door hung crooked, one hinge broken. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt an immediate recognition, as though he had been expected. He approached slowly, each step echoing faintly in the stillness. When he pushed the door open, a thin gust of cold air brushed past him, carrying the scent of ash and damp wood. Inside, everything appeared untouched yet arranged, as if someone had paused mid-action and never returned. A kettle sat near the hearth. A chair faced the window. Dust lay evenly across every surface, except for a small space on the table where something had recently rested. On the wall, faint symbols spiraled outward, hand-drawn in charcoal or soot. Circles, lines, and what looked like words in no known language. His lantern's glow made them seem to move, almost breathe. Samuel's pulse quickened. He whispered, "Hello?" The cabin gave no answer, but a subtle vibration seemed to hum through the floorboards, like a distant chord struck deep underground. That night, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He built a small fire, read through his journal, and placed the mysterious note beside it. He felt a strange kinship between the two, as if the note were part of his own story, returning to him. When he finally drifted into sleep, he dreamt vividly, a door standing in the woods, tall and featureless, pulsing faintly with light. A voice spoke from behind it, calm and patient. "You've come far enough, Samuel. Rest now." He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, his lantern nearly out. He checked the note. Its paper was damp but glowing faintly, the ink darker, more pronounced. He stepped outside and looked toward the ridge where he'd entered the valley. The forest was gone, replaced by thick fog stretching endlessly in all directions. His first thought was that he was disoriented. But as the morning wore on, the realization deepened. The path he'd followed simply wasn't there anymore. He wrote briefly in his journal, "Found a cabin. Cannot locate trail. Silence absolute. Dream of door again." He spent the next day searching for a way out, marking trees and counting steps. Every route led him back to the clearing. By evening he returned to the cabin, exhausted and shaken. He sat before the hearth, rubbing his hands together. The stillness pressed against him, heavy and deliberate. From the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a shadow move near the window, a brief flicker, like someone passing outside. When he turned, nothing. Then faintly came the whisper. It wasn't clear at first, more vibration than voice, but it grew clearer with each breath. It spoke no words, only a rhythm, steady and low, like the hum of a remembered lullaby. He leaned forward, heart racing, listening. The whisper stopped when he whispered back, "Who's there?" Silence returned, vast and complete, and yet, deep in that silence, Samuel could swear he heard something waiting, something patient, something aware. Morning came grey and heavy, but Samuel wasn't sure he had actually slept. The dream of the door lingered again, closer this time, clearer. It wasn't just a shape in the woods anymore. It had a frame, carved with the same spiral symbols he'd seen on the cabin walls. And there was something or someone standing beyond it, blurred like a figure underwater. He woke to find new markings scratched into the wood near the fireplace. They hadn't been there the night before. Thin, deliberate lines, almost like tally marks. 7 of them. He ran a hand across the grooves, fresh. The splinters were still sharp. Whoever or whatever had made them had been inside while he slept. Outside, the fog had not lifted. It moved with a strange rhythm, as though breathing with the land. The forest had lost its familiar scent of pine and damp earth. Instead, the air smelled faintly of burnt paper and rain. He stood in the doorway, clutching his journal, trying to calm his thoughts. His compass needle spun aimlessly. The world felt detached from direction itself. Then he noticed something he hadn't before. Near the edge of the clearing, half buried beneath moss and soil, a glint of glass. He knelt and brushed it clean. It was a small pocket watch, its cover cracked but still ticking faintly. The initials LR were etched on the back. He opened it, expecting to see the usual face of gears and hands, but instead, behind the glass, there was only a piece of paper. Folded tightly, inside a single line read, "Time here does not belong to you." He froze. The handwriting was identical to the first note. He looked toward the cabin again. The door stood ajar. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a shape standing just inside, a tall, thin silhouette, before it vanished when he blinked. He stepped back. "Who are you?" he shouted. His voice sounded swallowed, as if the air refused to carry it. No answer, only the faint tick of the watch. He pocketed it and returned inside. The air was colder now. On the table, his journal had been moved, open to a blank page. His pen rested neatly beside it, though he was sure he'd left it capped in his bag. Words began to appear, slowly, one letter at a time, as though being written by an invisible hand. "You wanted peace. You came to the doorway. Do not run now." His breath caught in his throat. He slammed the journal shut and stumbled back. The lantern flickered violently, casting the room into a stuttering dance of shadow and light. Then silence again. Thick, complete, as if the forest itself had leaned in to listen. He waited, trembling, until his heartbeat steadied. Then he forced himself to reopen the journal. The message was gone. The page was blank again. Only the faint indentation of the words remained, pressed into the paper. He copied them into another entry, hand shaking. "Something is here. Something that writes." That evening, Samuel sat near the door, staring into the fog. He didn't know how long he'd been there when he heard the soft crunch of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving just beyond the line of sight. "Who's there?" He called again. This time a voice replied, not human, not entirely. It was faint, layered, like multiple whispers speaking at once. "You asked to leave the world behind?" He froze. "What do you mean?" "You said you were sick of it. You said you wanted silence. You said you would walk until the noise stopped." He stepped forward, searching the fog, heart hammering. "Show yourself." But the voice only sighed, fading like breath against glass. "You were already here." Then the fog thinned, briefly. He saw movement ahead, a shape forming. The door from his dreams, now real, standing among the trees, carved with spirals that shimmered faintly in the grey light. The cabin seemed to hum in response, the walls vibrating softly. Samuel fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sight. The door was open just a crack. Inside was only darkness, but it wasn't the kind of darkness that hid things. It was a darkness that invited. He whispered, almost prayer-like, "What's behind it?" The whisper came again, gentle, close enough to feel against his skin. Peace. He reached for the watch in his pocket. It had stopped ticking. The fog closed again, swallowing the door, leaving him alone in the clearing. The next morning, Samuel awoke to the sound of dripping water. It echoed rhythmically, steady and hollow, coming from somewhere within the cabin walls. When he stood, the air felt heavier, dense with moisture and something else, something metallic. He followed the sound to a corner near the hearth, where the wooden floorboards were darkened with dampness. He pressed down gently, and one of the planks shifted under his hand. Beneath it, the drip was louder. Using his knife, he pried the board loose. A narrow gap revealed a shallow pit lined with stone. The smell of old iron drifted up. Inside, half buried in the wet earth, was a metal box, its surface rusted but intact. He hesitated, then lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. When he opened it, he found a stack of papers, journal pages, brittle and stained, and something wrapped carefully in oilcloth. He unwrapped it to reveal a small mirror, its surface fogged and fractured with hairline cracks. When he tilted it toward the light, his reflection blinked though he hadn't. He dropped it immediately, heart racing. The mirror landed face up on the dirt, showing not the ceiling above, but the fog outside the cabin, shifting slowly like something alive. He whispered, "No," and slammed the box shut. The journal pages inside, though nearly destroyed, were still legible in parts. The handwriting was different this time, uneven, rushed. He read the first line, "If you find this, do not look into the mirror twice." Further down, smeared ink trailed off mid-sentence. "The door opens when the watcher sees itself." He couldn't read the rest. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. The fog churned as though reacting to the sound. He felt something stir in the distance, a pull, faint but constant, like gravity turned sideways. He stood there for what felt like hours, unable to decide what to do next. The silence pressed harder with each passing minute, until it seemed to hum inside his head. Then he heard footsteps. Again, slow, careful, this time from behind the cabin. He grabbed the lantern and stepped to the window. The fog was thick, but through it he caught a flicker of movement, something pale moving between the trees. Not walking exactly, sliding. He backed away from the window. The mirror on the ground began to vibrate, its cracked surface rippling as if disturbed by water. From it came a faint whisper, overlapping voices like distant echoes of thought. He couldn't make out the words until he leaned closer. "Do not be afraid. It's only yourself you're hearing." He stumbled back, heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The whisper turned softer, almost tender. "You asked to leave." "We only answered." The lantern flickered violently, casting his shadow in twisted shapes across the walls. The markings above the hearth began to pulse faintly, each symbol glowing for a heartbeat, then fading. He felt dizzy. The air thickened, shimmering with heat, though the room was cold. The fog outside began pressing against the windows like something sentient, its grey surface flexing and recoiling. Samuel clutched his head, trying to focus. "No," he muttered, "this isn't real. I'm just tired." But then his own voice replied, calm and measured from the mirror's direction. "You're not tired. You're waking up." He froze. The voice was identical to his, tone, rhythm, everything, but distant, hollow, like it came from a deep tunnel. The reflection in the mirror had changed. It wasn't mimicking him anymore. It was standing still, eyes blackened, face expressionless. He lunged forward, covering the mirror with his jacket, breath ragged. "Stop it! Stop it!" Silence again. The hum faded. The fog stilled. When he dared to lift the jacket, the reflection was gone. Only his own pale, trembling face stared back. He exhaled shakily and sat down, forcing himself to breathe. After a while, he began writing again. "The mirror shows things I don't do. Voices say I wanted this, but I don't remember asking for anything." He looked at the metal box again, then back at the mirror. The crack across its surface had deepened, almost like a vein spreading. Something faint glimmered within it, light that didn't belong to any source he could see. He decided to bury both. That night, under the ashen moonlight filtering through the fog, he dug a shallow hole behind the cabin and placed the box and mirror inside. The soil seemed reluctant to close, as though the earth itself resisted swallowing what he was offering. When he returned inside, exhausted and covered in dirt, the journal lay open on the table again. Another message had appeared in neat handwriting, not his own. "You can bury what you find, but not what you are." He didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames until dawn. The next morning brought no sunlight, only a dull grey haze filtering through the cabin's cracked windows. Samuel's eyes were swollen from a night without rest. His mind swam in fragments, the voice, the mirror, the words on the page. None of it made sense, yet the fear that had gripped him now sat deeper, heavier, more familiar. He lit the lantern again, though it was barely needed, and flipped through the pages of the stranger's journal. Between smudged ink and water damage, he noticed something new, drawings he hadn't seen before. Circles intersecting like ripples, a series of doors, and what looked like an endless path fading into fog. Beneath one sketch, a line read, "Peace waits where time forgets itself." He closed the book slowly, the phrase ringing in his mind. Outside, the forest was utterly still. Not even the wind dared to move through it. He stepped outside, careful not to disturb the mist clinging to the trees. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of soil beneath his boots, his own breathing, the faint drip from the eaves. He walked toward the place where he had buried the box and mirror. The soil there looked disturbed, as though it had been dug up during the night. He knelt, touched the ground. It was cold but soft, as if recently turned. He didn't dare check beneath. A sharp caw startled him. A blackbird perched on a nearby branch, staring down at him. Its feathers glistened wet, though no rain had fallen. When it opened its beak instead of sound, Samuel heard words in his head, as clear as if whispered beside him. "You shouldn't have buried the mirror." He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. The bird tilted its head, eyes glinting with a human-like recognition. "Leave me alone," Samuel said under his breath, but the words that came next were his own, repeated softly by the creature. "Leave me alone." He turned and ran back to the cabin. His heart pounded so hard it drowned out thought. Once inside, he bolted the door and leaned against it, gasping. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It had a weight, like someone or something was holding its breath with him. He took out his notebook and wrote feverishly, "Voices again. Not in my head, outside. Something copies me. Or maybe I'm copying it." The pages shook beneath his hand. He forced himself to write more, to think logically. He listed what he knew. He had found a mirror. The mirror showed something that wasn't him. The mirror was buried, but it wasn't where he left it. Then, almost involuntarily, he added a fourth line. The mirror never left. He froze. He didn't remember writing that. The ink glistened, fresh. He turned toward the hearth, and there it was. The mirror, lying neatly beside the fire, unbroken now, clean as if newly polished. "No," he whispered. "No, I buried you." He stepped closer, trembling. His reflection stared back at him, calm, unblinking. The room behind the reflection looked wrong, stretched, distant, as though seen through water. The reflection raised its hand, palm out. Samuel stayed by his side. Then the reflection smiled. The lantern flickered violently. A gust of cold air swept through the room, though the door remained bolted. The markings above the fireplace began to shift, curling into new shapes that pulsed faintly like breathing. He shouted, "Stop it!" "Stop!" But the reflection moved its mouth first, forming the same words, only half a second ahead of him. The ground trembled. Dishes fell from the shelves and shattered. The air thickened again with that metallic taste. He grabbed the mirror to throw it, but the glass rippled under his touch like water, and his hand disappeared past the surface. He screamed and yanked it back, stumbling against the wall. His fingers were freezing, coated in a faint silver sheen that wouldn't rub off. He dropped the mirror, backing away. It didn't break. Instead, it stood upright on the floor, its surface now glowing faintly, revealing something beyond the reflection, a cabin just like his, but older, decayed, and inside, another man sitting at a table. Head in his hands, it was him. Samuel stared, unable to breathe. The other him looked up suddenly, meeting his eyes through the glass. Then the voice returned, soft and final. "You can't bury what's already inside you." The mirror darkened, the light in the room dimmed to nothing. When it cleared, Samuel was standing alone, the mirror gone once more. Only his footprints led to the spot where it had been. He sat by the hearth for a long time, staring at the cold ashes. He thought of leaving, of running, of finding the trail back to town, but something in him knew the forest wouldn't let him go. That night, he didn't light the fire. He simply waited, listening to the silence breathe. By morning, the fog had seeped into the cabin, clinging to the floor like smoke from an invisible fire. Samuel woke to its quiet movement and thought for a moment that he was dreaming. The air was damp and tasted faintly of rust. He rose slowly, every joint aching as though he'd slept for years instead of hours. The world outside the windows was a pale blur. The forest had vanished behind a white wall. He could barely make out the first few trees. He sat at the table and stared at the open journal. The page had turned itself overnight. At the top, written in firm, clean handwriting he didn't recognize, were 4 words: "You are almost home." He didn't know what that meant, but the message filled him with a strange calm, a stillness that felt both comforting and deeply wrong. He poured water into a tin cup and took a sip. It tasted metallic again, like old coins. As he set the cup down, a dull thump echoed from the far wall, soft at first, then again louder. He froze. The sound came from behind the boards he'd replaced the night before. He waited. Another thump, slower this time, deliberate. He stood and walked toward it, his pulse loud in his ears. He pressed his ear to the wall. There was something moving in there, something dragging itself through the narrow space between the cabin's walls. "Hello?" he called, his voice low but trembling. The sound stopped. He stepped back, reaching for the lantern. The light wavered, casting trembling shadows across the room. He looked again and saw the faint outline of a hand pressing against the wood from the other side. Fingers spread, palm out, like a mirror image of his own. He staggered back. No. The boards creaked, bending outward, though they didn't break. Then the pressure eased, and the shadow withdrew. Silence returned, thick as fog. Samuel's breath came unevenly. He forced himself to speak, to prove to himself he still could. "And I'm not staying here," he whispered. "I'm not dying here." He gathered what he could, his knife, his notebook, a few crumbs of bread, and pushed open the door. The fog poured in, swallowing the light. Outside, everything was soundless. The forest no longer smelled of pine or soil. It smelled like wet stone. He walked toward the path he thought led back to town. The ground felt soft, like walking across a damp carpet. The fog thinned just enough for him to see faint shapes ahead, trees, boulders, or perhaps something else. He kept walking. After what felt like hours, the path began to rise, the earth sloping gently upward. And there, at the top of the ridge, barely visible through the haze, he saw a faint light, steady, golden, warm. A cabin light. He stopped. His breath caught in his throat. The shape ahead was unmistakable. The roof, the chimney, the narrow porch. It was his cabin. He turned around. The trail behind him had vanished. Only fog remained. He approached slowly. Through the window he saw movement. A man sitting at the table, head bowed, hands clasped in front of him. The man looked up. Samuel stumbled back, every nerve in his body screaming. The man inside was him, the same face, same clothes, same weary eyes. He ran toward the window, shouting, "Who are you?" But the other Samuel didn't move. He just stared, calm, as though waiting. Then, slowly, the man raised his hand and pointed toward the forest behind Samuel. Samuel turned, following the gesture. Through the fog, he saw faint figures emerging, dozens of them, some standing, some crawling, some only half visible. Each one carried something different, a lantern, a journal, a mirror, a cross. And each one looked at him with the same face, his own. He stumbled backward, tripping over the roots beneath his feet. No, this isn't real. But the fog pulsed like a heartbeat, and the air itself seemed to whisper back, "You wanted peace." He turned and ran. The forest bent around him, trees curving inward like ribs. Every direction looked the same. No landmarks, no sky, no sound except his ragged breathing. He fell once, scraping his hands, but forced himself up again. When he finally stopped, panting, he found himself standing in a clearing. At the center stood a large, flat stone, covered in carvings, identical to those inside the cabin. In its center rested the mirror, perfect, clean, waiting. He shook his head violently. "No, I buried you." But even as he said it, the air around him changed. The fog grew thinner, revealing faint light beneath the stone, soft, warm, golden. The same light he had seen through the cabin window. He stepped closer, compelled by something beyond reason. His reflection looked calm now, no longer frightening. It was smiling, sadly, almost kindly, and for a moment Samuel felt weightless, like standing on the edge of sleep. Then the reflection moved its lips and whispered, "It's time." The stone split open. The fog surged upward. Samuel screamed, but no sound came out. The clearing went silent. Only the mirror remained. When Samuel opened his eyes, the forest was gone. He stood in an endless plain of grey mist, the ground neither solid nor soft beneath his feet, something in between, like walking on forgotten memories. The air was still, not cold or warm, but empty, weightless. Above him, no sky, no sun, only a pale, moving glow, shifting like breath. He turned slowly. There was nothing in any direction, no sound, no echo when he spoke his own name. "Where am I?" he murmured. From the mist ahead, a faint outline began to form. At first only a shape, then a figure walking toward him. As it grew clearer, he saw that it was himself again. But this time, the other Samuel looked older, thinner, face etched with deep lines of exhaustion and peace. The older reflection stopped a few feet away and spoke in a voice soft but firm. "You came here looking for silence." Samuel stared at him. "Who are you?" The older self tilted his head slightly. "I'm what you left behind." The words hung in the air like dust caught in light. "I don't understand," Samuel said. "I wanted to escape, to start over." The figure smiled faintly, almost kind. "You didn't want to start over. You wanted to end without dying. The woods heard you. They gave you what you asked for." Samuel shook his head, panic rising. "No, that's not. I never—" But he stopped. The truth caught in his throat like a stone. He remembered the days before he came here, the arguments, the job lost, the letters unanswered, the crushing sense that life had stopped meaning anything at all. "I was tired," he whispered. "I know," said the other. "That's why you're here." The mist thickened around them, shapes beginning to form within it, trees faint and shifting, like echoes of the forest he knew. Samuel looked down. The ground now bore faint patterns, the same spirals and markings from the cabin. They pulsed faintly under his feet, leading forward. "What is this place?" he asked. "The threshold," the other answered, "where people go when they no longer belong to time." Samuel's voice trembled. "Then, am I dead?" The older self looked at him gently. "You're between. You asked for peace, remember?" "I didn't mean this." The reflection stepped closer, his eyes deep with something that wasn't pity, understanding perhaps, or memory. "You thought peace meant absence. No noise, no pain, no people. But peace isn't silence. It's acceptance." Samuel felt his chest tighten. "I don't want to stay here." "Then don't." The figure pointed to a faint glow in the distance, a doorway of light, hovering like dawn, breaking through fog. Samuel took a step toward it, hesitant. "What's beyond that?" The other smiled again, but his form was fading. "That depends on whether you're ready to live again." As the figure dissolved, the markings beneath Samuel's feet brightened, forming a path of soft light leading straight to the doorway. He began to walk. Each step grew heavier, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of memory returning. The laughter of his sister, the smell of rain, the warmth of sunlight on his face. The farther he walked, the more he remembered. The path narrowed. The light ahead pulsed like a heartbeat. Then a sound broke the silence, a whisper carried through the mist. "You can still turn back." He stopped. The voice wasn't his reflections this time. It was softer, feminine, almost familiar. He turned and saw her. The old woman from the forest, the one who had appeared that first night in the cabin doorway, stood a few yards away, her shawl fluttering in wind that didn't exist. "You shouldn't have followed the light," she said. "It doesn't lead where you think." He frowned. You're real." "I was," she said simply. "Once, like you, I found this place long ago." "Then what is this?" She looked past him toward the doorway. "A choice." He followed her gaze. The light shimmered faintly, its edges trembling. For the first time, he noticed shadows within it, faint outlines of faces, hundreds of them, watching, waiting. The old woman stepped closer. "That door doesn't lead to life, it leads to forgetting. It's what they call peace here, the kind that takes everything with it." Samuel felt a cold realization spread through him. "Then what happens if I don't go?" "Then you remember," she said, "and remembering hurts. But it means you're still you." He looked between her and the light. The glow beckoned with quiet promise. He could end the pain, the confusion, the voices. He could finally rest. But in the back of his mind, another thought whispered, "If I go through, who will come back to tell my story?" He took a deep breath. "What did you choose?" The woman smiled sadly. "I waited too long to decide. Now I'm part of the mist." She reached out, touching his arm. Her hand felt cold, but real. "Whatever you choose, choose it while you still remember your name." The mist began to shift again, the light pulsing brighter, the ground trembling beneath his feet. He turned toward the doorway one last time, heart heavy. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "My name is Samuel Ward." The moment he spoke it, the world cracked open in blinding light. When Samuel opened his eyes, the light had softened. He was no longer in the grey mist, no longer suspended between echoes. The forest returned, but it was different, quiet, yet alive. Each leaf shimmered with dew, each branch bent slightly as if bowing to him. The air smelled of pine and earth, sweet with the promise of rain. He rose slowly, hands trembling. His journal lay beside him, open, the pages blank, as if they had never held the messages. Yet, in his chest, the memory of every note, every whisper, every mirrored voice remained vivid, burned into his mind. The path ahead was clear, narrow but defined, leading deeper into the woods. For the first time since he'd arrived, he felt certain of each step, grounded. He glanced down and noticed an object partially buried in the soft soil, an old leather satchel. Its flap was cracked, corners worn smooth from years of handling. Inside, he found several items, a rusted key, a small notebook, and a folded map. The notebook contained careful entries in a familiar hand, his own, detailing places he had walked, thoughts he had written, and sketches of the symbols he had seen in the cabin. The map outlined trails through the forest he had not noticed before, each path marked with symbols he now understood. Samuel's fingers traced the key. He didn't know what it unlocked, but instinct told him it belonged with the cabin, or with the doorway. He walked, the satchel swinging lightly at his side. The forest seemed to recognize him. Shadows retreated subtly as he moved, allowing light to touch the moss-covered trunks and the wildflowers along the trail. The air vibrated faintly, not with sound, but with memory. The echo of footsteps that were not his, the whispers that were no longer present. Hours passed without time feeling real. The mist lingered at the edges of the woods, but never crossed into the path. Samuel paused at a stream, watching the water curl over stones and roots. He cupped his hands and drank. The water tasted pure and warm, carrying no metallic hint this time. He noticed movement along the bank, a fox, cautious and watchful, its fur bristling slightly in the morning light. It paused, staring at him with intelligent, unwavering eyes, then darted into the underbrush. The forest had shifted, but it was still alive, still watching. As he continued, he encountered a clearing where the fog had gathered thickly the night before. Now it lay in delicate tendrils across the grass, glowing faintly in the early light. The spiral symbols he had seen carved into the cabin walls were etched here as well, in stone and soil, subtle but unmistakable. He touched one, feeling warmth beneath his fingertips, a heartbeat beneath the surface. The key felt heavier in his pocket. He remembered the mirror, the voices, the doorway. None of it had left him, yet he now carried clarity. The forest, the cabin, the mist. They had tested him, stripped him to memory and fear, but they had also shown him something he had forgotten: presence, awareness, choice. He reached the base of a small hill where the cabin had once stood, or where he thought it had. There was no cabin now, only an expanse of green, the foundation stones barely visible beneath moss. He knelt, brushing soil from one stone. Beneath it was a lock, ancient, rusted, yet unmistakably made for the key he carried. With a steady hand, he inserted it. The lock clicked, surprisingly easy, and a stone slab shifted slightly, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside were a few personal items: a framed photograph of his sister as a child, a set of letters long written but never sent, and a small wooden box. He lifted the box carefully. Inside, he found a compass, familiar brass, cracked glass, the initials of his father engraved on the back. The needle pointed steadily north, unwavering. Samuel held it to his chest, exhaling slowly. The forest around him felt softer, quieter, but no longer threatening. The presence that had followed, guided, and questioned him had withdrawn, leaving him with clarity and choice. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to smile. He was still Samuel Ward, still alive, still remembered. He looked back at the trail he had followed. It was there, faint but real, ready to lead him home. And for the first time, he understood the difference between peace and escape. The forest path grew wider as Samuel walked, the trees thinning to reveal rolling hills bathed in soft sunlight. Birds called from hidden branches, and the distant hum of life reminded him that the world continued beyond the mist and the mirrors. Each step forward carried him farther from the strange threshold he had crossed, and closer to the tangible reality of the town that lay somewhere ahead. The leather satchel hung from his shoulder, the weight of its contents reassuring. The journal, the key, the map, the compass, they were more than tools. They were proof that he had navigated a passage no one else had survived intact. As he moved, the symbols that had haunted him in the cabin appeared subtly along the path, engraved in bark, pressed into soil, etched in the air itself. He traced them with his fingers, feeling the faint vibration beneath his touch. Each one seemed to pulse with memory, a reminder that his journey was not yet complete. He paused at a crossroads. Two trails diverged, both equally worn, both equally mysterious. The map offered no guidance. He closed his eyes and let the compass guide him. Its needle trembled for a moment before settling decisively north. He followed that direction, stepping lightly over roots and stones. The air grew warmer, tinged with the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting patterns across his path like dancing memories. After some time, he came across a clearing where an old stone fountain stood. Its basin was empty, cracked and covered in moss, yet Samuel sensed that it had once been a gathering place, a point of pause and reflection. At the fountain's base lay a small bronze locket, half buried in soil. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. Inside was a faded photograph of a young couple, their faces serene and untroubled. He did not recognize them, yet the locket radiated familiarity, a silent message from the forest that he was connected to more than his own path. He tucked it into his pocket, realizing that every artifact he found, every message, had a purpose, each one teaching him about choice, memory and consequence. The clearing stretched wide, sunlight spilling across it in golden waves. In the distance, a cottage appeared, nestled among the hills, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. It was modest, inviting, and seemed to hum with life. Samuel approached cautiously. The door creaked open before he could knock, and an elderly man stepped onto the porch, leaning on a wooden cane. His eyes were sharp, yet kind. "You've walked far," the man said, voice steady and calm. I think I have," Samuel replied, unsure if he was speaking of distance or experience. "You carry much with you," the old man continued, gesturing to the satchel. "Some of it you need, some you will leave behind. That choice is yours." Samuel nodded slowly. He felt the weight of the artifacts, the mirror, the key, the locket, all of it pressing against his conscience. Each item represented a step, a lesson, or a trial. The forest had tested him, stripped him bare, and yet it had offered insight in return. He sat on a nearby bench, opening the journal once more. The pages had shifted again, but this time the entries were his own, clear and legible. They chronicled his journey, the fear, the revelations, and the moments when he had almost given in to despair. He wrote a final line: "I have walked through shadow and silence. I've seen myself as I feared and as I am. I choose to remember, to carry forward and to live." The old man watched him silently. After a pause, he said, "Then the path ahead will open naturally. Peace is not found in forgetting, but in embracing what you are." Samuel rose, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. The forest behind him seemed to whisper approval, the symbols along the path fading as if satisfied. The fog, the mirrors, the whispers, they were part of his past now, guides rather than captors. He looked toward the cottage again, and for the first time, he felt hope. Not the naive hope of escape, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who had faced themselves fully and survived. He started walking, each step measured, conscious, aware. The hills rolled before him, bathed in sunlight, the path winding but visible. Somewhere beyond lay the town, the people, the life he had fled and feared. Yet Samuel no longer felt fear, only clarity. For the first time in many days, he smiled. The path led Samuel toward the distant hills, where the sun painted the morning mist in soft gold. With every step, the memory of the forest, the mirrors, the fog, the whispers, faded but did not vanish. It lingered like a shadow just behind his shoulder, a quiet reminder of what he had endured. He walked through a narrow valley where wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors, and the air smelled of earth and rain. His satchel pressed lightly against him, its contents familiar now. The journal, the locket, the key, the compass. Each artifact felt like a talisman, holding a piece of the trials he had survived. In the distance, a small river wound through the valley, silver in the sunlight. Samuel followed its edge, listening to the soft rush of water. The sound was soothing, grounding him in the present. He paused to drink, cupping his hands and tasting the cool clarity of life that was tangible and unaltered by illusion. As he continued, he noticed a figure ahead, a man tending a small orchard near a wooden fence. The man looked up, squinting against the sun, and waved. Samuel hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but then realized that the stranger radiated familiarity, safety. "Good morning," the man called. "You've come a long way." Samuel nodded, uncertain how to respond. "Yes, I suppose I have. Would you like to rest?" the man asked. "There's water and shade. You look like you've carried more than your body should," he accepted, stepping into the orchard. The air was fragrant with blossoms, bees moving lazily between flowers. Samuel sank onto a bench beneath a sturdy oak. The man poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him, smiling gently. "I've seen travelers who come this way," the man said. "They carry burdens, some visible, some hidden. Most do not find the courage to continue, but you carry more than they can imagine, and yet you still walk." Samuel took a slow sip, letting the water wash over his senses. "It's been difficult," he admitted. "I've seen things I cannot explain. I've faced myself in ways I never thought possible." The man nodded knowingly. "The forest is a mirror, Samuel, not of what you want to see, but of what you must. The mirror shows the truth, even if it frightens. And the path you follow now, that is where you reconcile what you've seen." Samuel's gaze fell to the satchel at his side. He opened it briefly, touching the journal, the key, the compass, and the locket. Each item carried a memory, a lesson, a warning. He understood that they were not obstacles, nor mere curiosities. They were guides, meant to prepare him for the choice ahead. He looked at the orchard again. The man leaned against the fence, watching him with patience. "Do you remember why you left?" the man asked. Samuel thought of the cabin, the mist, the doorway, and the mirror. He thought of the whispers, the reflections, the choice to remember rather than vanish. "I wanted to escape," he said quietly. "I thought leaving would bring peace." "Peace," the man said, "is not found in absence. It is found in acceptance, in living with what has happened and choosing what comes next. That is the courage the forest tests." Samuel nodded, feeling the truth of those words seep into him. He understood that the journey through the mist had been a trial not of endurance, but of self-awareness. He had confronted fear, regret, and desire, and he had emerged conscious and intact. He rose from the bench and took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fragrant orchard air. The river gurgled nearby, the hills stretched in gentle waves, and sunlight dappled the path ahead. The forest, the mirrors, the doorway, they were behind him, memories shaped into clarity rather than terror. The man at the fence nodded again, silently. Samuel felt gratitude, not just for the offer of water and shade, but for the quiet understanding of what it meant to walk forward. Aware and unafraid, he adjusted the satchel on his shoulder and took the path leading from the orchard toward the town visible on the horizon. With each step, he felt the weight of the past transform into knowledge, into purpose, and though he did not yet know what lay ahead, Samuel understood that the choice he had made, to remember, to face himself, to continue, was a victory in itself. He walked with measured pace, each step a quiet affirmation that he belonged to this world, fully present, fully alive. The town emerged slowly from the horizon, rooftops catching the sun in gentle glints, smoke curling from chimneys. Samuel's feet ached, but he walked steadily, guided by the path that wound down the hills and into the familiar streets. The scent of bread baking and wet earth carried on a breeze that seemed impossibly ordinary after the forest's strange stillness. He passed houses with gardens spilling over in blooms of orange, yellow, and red. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby lane, and he paused, momentarily startled by the simplicity of life that continued without him. The noise was not threatening, it was grounding, tangible. Samuel's satchel felt lighter now, though he kept it close. The artifacts inside, the compass, the locket, the key, the journal, were no longer burdens. They were proof of a journey that had tested him, stripped him bare, and offered clarity in return. At the town square, he spotted a bench near a fountain. The water sparkled, sunlight catching droplets like diamonds. Samuel sat, allowing the hum of life around him to settle into his bones. He opened the journal, now fully legible and organized. Every entry, every sketch, every reflection flowed logically, like a map not just of the forest, but of his own mind. A gentle breeze rustled the pages. Samuel noticed a folded note tucked inside the back cover, written in the same precise, unfamiliar handwriting that had appeared in the cabin. "You carry both shadows and light. Where you go next is your choice, but do not forget either." He folded it back and held the journal to his chest, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic. Shadows and light, memory and presence, fear and courage, they were inseparable now, woven into him. The sound of footsteps approached. An elderly woman, leaning lightly on a cane, stopped beside the bench. She smiled kindly. Samuel did not recognize her, yet there was an unmistakable warmth, a sense that she belonged in this moment. "You've been far," she said. "Not just in distance, but in spirit," Samuel nodded. I've learned things I can't yet put into words. Things about fear, about myself." The woman glanced at the journal. "The forest teaches harsh lessons, but it also offers guidance. You've carried that guidance back here. Now it is up to you to use it." He looked around the square. People moved past, unaware, engaged in simple, ordinary acts. Samuel realized that life, real life, was both fragile and persistent. The forest had demanded attention to every detail, every choice. Now the challenge was to integrate what he had learned into the ongoing flow of existence. "I don't know if I can fully explain what happened," he admitted, "or whether anyone would believe me." "Belief is not the point," the woman said. "Understanding is. and only you can bear witness to your own journey. Samuel felt a calmness settle in him. He could still recall the mirrors, the fog, the doorway, and the voices. They had left marks, but those marks were not chains. They were proof of endurance and choice. He rose, feeling steadier than he had in weeks. The town felt alive, textured, complex, and he was a part of it once more. He could breathe fully, aware that he had faced the trials and emerged intact. The bench remained empty, the fountain gurgling softly. Samuel walked toward the market, the laughter of children guiding him, the scent of bread urging him forward. He passed familiar streets, each corner holding fragments of memory, of life he had paused but not abandoned. In the distance, the hills rose gently, a reminder of the forest he had left behind. He glanced toward them with a sense of reverence rather than fear. The path had shaped him, the artifacts had guided him, and now the lessons belonged entirely to him. Samuel felt the weight of the satchel once more, then loosened the straps, letting it rest lightly on his shoulder. The compass pointed steadily north, the locket warmed in his palm, and the journal held the record of his survival and insight. He stepped into the marketplace fully, not as a man fleeing, not as a man broken, but as one who had confronted himself, faced the unknown, and returned with understanding. Each person he passed was a reminder that life moved on, that stories continued, and that he too could now continue, fully present. The sun climbed higher, warming the streets. Samuel inhaled deeply, savoring the ordinary, sacred rhythm of daily life. The sound of wheels on cobblestone, the chatter of merchants, the soft brushing of wind against trees. He knew he was ready. Samuel moved through the town with measured steps, the rhythm of everyday life grounding him in a way the forest never could. He passed familiar shops and homes, the scents of cooking and fresh timber reminding him that the world he had fled was still alive and waiting. Every face he passed held its own story, its own weight of memory. Yet none bore the burden he had carried through mist and mirror. At the edge of town, a narrow cobblestone street led to a quiet courtyard, shaded by an ancient oak. Beneath its sprawling branches lay a small wooden chest, half hidden among fallen leaves. Samuel recognized it instinctively as another artifact. Something left intentionally, a message from the forest or the forces that guided it. He knelt and brushed aside the leaves, opening the chest carefully. Inside were several items: a folded photograph, a bundle of letters tied with twine, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The photograph showed a younger version of himself, standing beside the abandoned cabin, notebook in hand, the fog rolling in behind him. The letters, all unsent, carried confessions, regrets, and dreams he had never shared. He took the wooden box in his hands. The carvings were delicate spirals, reminiscent of the markings he had seen in the forest and in the cabin. The lid lifted easily, revealing a tiny crystal orb that glimmered with an inner light, faint but steady. Samuel felt a quiet hum from the orb, a vibration that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. The forest, the mirrors, the fog, they had all prepared him for this. Every artifact he encountered had a purpose: to teach him patience, courage, and the importance of memory. The orb now called for attention, inviting him to reflect, not to escape. He sat beneath the oak, placing the items before him. Opening the letters one by one, he read fragments of the past he had not fully acknowledged. Words of apology to friends he had neglected, phrases of longing for moments with family, and reflections on choices made and paths abandoned. Each letter was a mirror, reflecting not the supernatural, but the human, the weight of time, the importance of presence, and the need for reconciliation. The photograph reminded him of the fear he had felt on the day he entered the forest. The cabin had been a crucible of his psyche, testing his understanding of life and death, choice and consequence. The letters offered insight into the man he had once been and the man he had become. And the crystal orb, glowing faintly in the sunlight, offered a sense of continuity, a reminder that even extraordinary experiences are woven into the ordinary fabric of existence. As he held the orb, Samuel felt a shift within him. The lessons of the forest, the mirrors, the fog, the doorway, were no longer haunting. They were guiding. The forest had not sought to trap him. It had offered him a chance to reconcile with himself, to integrate fear, memory, and desire into his sense of being. A breeze stirred the leaves above, carrying the faint murmur of the town behind him, the laughter of children, the distant ringing of a bell, the hum of daily life. Samuel breathed deeply, feeling the balance between what he had endured and the reality he now returned to. The orb pulsed softly in his hand, in rhythm with his pulse, and he understood that the past and the present were not opposites, but companions, each shaping the other. He gathered the items carefully, placing them back in the chest, and tied the letters securely with the twine. The photograph he slipped into his journal, alongside the reflections of his journey, and the orb he held lightly in his palm, as if cradling a heartbeat. For the first time in days, Samuel allowed himself to stand fully upright, feeling the sun on his face and the earth beneath his feet. He was no longer the hiker who had fled, nor the man who had wandered lost in mist and mirror. He was whole, integrated, ready to face the world that had seemed unbearable before but now shimmered with complexity, challenge and beauty. He took a step forward, leaving the courtyard behind, carrying with him the artifacts of memory, the lessons of survival, and the understanding that the world, in all its ordinary and extraordinary facets, was both demanding and forgiving. Each step was a quiet affirmation, a declaration that he would live fully, aware of shadows and light, mistakes and triumphs, loss and renewal. The forest had tested him, but life awaited him now, not as a trial, but as a continuation, a path to walk with eyes open, heart steady, and presence unshaken. Samuel walked through the town with a quiet awareness, the lessons of the forest lingering in each step. His eyes absorbed details he might once have overlooked, the way sunlight struck a window pane, the rhythmic sway of laundry on a line, the subtle patterns in the cobblestones beneath his feet. Life, he realized, was composed of these small, ordinary miracles, each moment a reflection of choice and attention. At the edge of town, he discovered a modest bookshop tucked into a narrow lane shaded by climbing ivy. He walked with measured pace, each step a quiet affirmation that he belonged to this world, fully present, fully alive. The town emerged slowly from the horizon, rooftops catching the sun in gentle glints, smoke curling from chimneys. Samuel's feet ached, but he walked steadily, guided by the path that wound down the hills and into the familiar streets. The scent of bread baking and wet earth carried on a breeze that seemed impossibly ordinary after the forest's strange stillness. He passed houses with gardens spilling over in blooms of orange, yellow, and red. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby lane, and he paused, momentarily startled by the simplicity of life that continued without him. The noise was not threatening, it was grounding, tangible. Samuel's satchel felt lighter now, though he kept it close. The artifacts inside, the compass, the locket, the key, the journal, were no longer burdens. They were proof of a journey that had tested him, stripped him bare, and offered clarity in return. At the town square, he spotted a bench near a fountain. The water sparkled, sunlight catching droplets like diamonds. Samuel sat, allowing the hum of life around him to settle into his bones. He opened the journal, now fully legible and organized. Every entry, every sketch, every reflection flowed logically, like a map, not just of the forest, but of his own mind. A gentle breeze rustled the pages. Samuel noticed a folded note tucked inside the back cover, written in the same precise, unfamiliar handwriting that had appeared in the cabin. "You carry both shadows and light. Where you go next is your choice, but do not forget either." He folded it back and held the journal to his chest, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic. Shadows and light, memory and presence, fear and courage, they were inseparable now, woven into him. The sound of footsteps approached, An elderly woman, leaning lightly on a cane, stopped beside the bench. She smiled kindly. Samuel did not recognize her, yet there was an unmistakable warmth, a sense that she belonged in this moment. "You've been far," she said. "Not just in distance, but in spirit," Samuel nodded. I've learned things I can't yet put into words. Things about fear, about myself." The woman glanced at the journal. "The forest teaches harsh lessons, but it also offers guidance. You've carried that guidance back here. Now it is up to you to use it." He looked around the square. People moved past, unaware, engaged in simple, ordinary acts. Samuel realized that life, real life, was both fragile and persistent. The forest had demanded attention to every detail, every choice. Now the challenge was to integrate what he had learned into the ongoing flow of existence. "I don't know if I can fully explain what happened," he admitted, "or whether anyone would believe me." "Belief is not the point," the woman said. "Understanding is, and only you can bear witness to your own journey." Samuel felt a calmness settle in him. He could still recall the mirrors, the fog, the doorway, and the voices. They had left marks, but those marks were not chains. They were proof of endurance and choice. He rose, feeling steadier than he had in weeks. The town felt alive, textured, complex, and he was a part of it once more. He could breathe fully, aware that he had faced the trials and emerged intact. The bench remained empty, the fountain gurgling softly. Samuel walked toward the market, the laughter of children guiding him, the scent of bread urging him forward. He passed familiar streets, each corner holding fragments of memory, of life he had paused but not abandoned. In the distance, the hills rose gently, a reminder of the forest he had left behind. He glanced toward them with a sense of reverence rather than fear. The path had shaped him, the artifacts had guided him, and now the lessons belonged entirely to him. Samuel felt the weight of the satchel once more, then loosened the straps, letting it rest lightly on his shoulder. The compass pointed steadily north, the locket warmed in his palm, and the journal held the record of his survival and insight. He stepped into the marketplace fully, not as a man fleeing, not as a man broken, but as one who had confronted himself, faced the unknown, and returned with understanding. Each person he passed was a reminder that life moved on, that stories continued, and that he too could now continue, fully present. The sun climbed higher, warming the streets. Samuel inhaled deeply, savoring the ordinary, sacred rhythm of daily life, the sound of wheels on cobblestone, the chatter of merchants, the soft brushing of wind against trees. He knew he was ready. Samuel moved through the town with measured steps, the rhythm of everyday life grounding him in a way the forest never could. He passed familiar shops and homes, the scents of cooking and fresh timber, reminding him that the world he had fled was still alive and waiting. Every face he passed held its own story, its own weight of memory, yet none bore the burden he had carried through mist and mirror. At the edge of town, a narrow cobblestone street led to a quiet courtyard shaded by an ancient oak. Beneath its sprawling branches lay a small wooden chest, half hidden among fallen leaves. Samuel recognized it instinctively as another artifact, something left intentionally, a message from the forest or the forces that guided it. He knelt and brushed aside the leaves, opening the chest carefully. Inside were several items, a folded photograph, a bundle of letters tied with twine, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The photograph showed a younger version of himself, standing beside the abandoned cabin, notebook in hand, the fog rolling in behind him. The letters, all unsent, carried confessions, regrets, and dreams he had never shared. He took the wooden box in his hands. The carvings were delicate spirals, reminiscent of the markings he had seen in the forest and in the cabin. The lid lifted easily, revealing a tiny crystal orb that glimmered with an inner light, faint but steady. Samuel felt a quiet hum from the orb, a vibration that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. The forest, the mirrors, the fog, they had all prepared him for this. Every artifact he encountered had a purpose, to teach him patience, courage, and the importance of memory. The orb now called for attention, inviting him to reflect, not to escape. He sat beneath the oak, placing the items before him. Opening the letters one by one, he read fragments of the past he had not fully acknowledged, words of apology to friends he had neglected, phrases of longing for moments with family, and reflections on choices made and paths abandoned. Each letter was a mirror reflecting not the supernatural, but the human, the weight of time, the importance of presence, and the need for reconciliation. The photograph reminded him of the fear he had felt on the day he entered the forest. The cabin had been a crucible of his psyche, testing his understanding of life and death, choice and consequence. The letters offered insight into the man he had once been and the man he had become, and the crystal orb, glowing faintly in the sunlight, offered a sense of continuity, a reminder that even extraordinary experiences are woven into the ordinary fabric of existence. As he held the orb, Samuel felt a shift within him. The lessons of the forest, the mirrors, the fog, the doorway, were no longer haunting. They were guiding. The forest had not sought to trap him. It had offered him a chance to reconcile with himself, to integrate fear, memory, and desire into his sense of being. A breeze stirred the leaves above, carrying the faint murmur of the town behind him, the laughter of children, the distant ringing of a bell, the hum of daily life. Samuel breathed deeply, feeling the balance between what he had endured and the reality he now returned to. The orb pulsed softly in his hand, in rhythm with his pulse, and he understood that the past and the present were not opposites, but companions, each shaping the other. He gathered the items carefully, placing them back in the chest, and tied the letters securely with the twine. The photograph he slipped into his journal, alongside the reflections of his journey, and the orb he held lightly in his palm, as if cradling a heartbeat. For the first time in days, Samuel allowed himself to stand fully upright, feeling the sun on his face and the earth beneath his feet. He was no longer the hiker who had fled, nor the man who had wandered lost in mist and mirror. He was whole, integrated, ready to face the world that had seemed unbearable before, but now shimmered with complexity, challenge, and beauty. He took a step forward, leaving the courtyard behind, carrying with him the artifacts of memory, the lessons of survival, and the understanding that the world, in all its ordinary and extraordinary facets, was both demanding and forgiving. Each step was a quiet affirmation, a declaration that he would live fully, aware of shadows and light, mistakes and triumphs, loss and renewal. The forest had tested him, but life awaited him now, not as a trial, but as a continuation, a path to walk with eyes open, heart steady, and presence unshaken. Samuel walked through the town with a quiet awareness, the lessons of the forest lingering in each step. His eyes absorbed details he might once have overlooked, the way sunlight struck a window pane, the rhythmic sway of laundry on a line, the subtle patterns in the cobblestones beneath his feet. Life, he realized, was composed of these small, ordinary miracles, each moment a reflection of choice and attention. At the edge of town, he discovered a modest bookshop, tucked into a narrow lane, shaded by climbing ivy. Its wooden sign creaked gently in the breeze, and through the glass he could see stacks of books, each a vessel of memory and knowledge. He stepped inside, the scent of aged paper and ink filling him with a sense of quiet reverence. The shop was empty, save for the owner, an elderly man with a soft smile and spectacles perched low on his nose. "Looking for anything in particular?" the man asked. Samuel shook his head. "Not exactly. I think I'm looking for understanding, or perhaps perspective." The man nodded, gesturing toward the rows of books. "Then you're in the right place. Each of these holds a fragment of the world, waiting for someone to piece it together." Samuel wandered the aisles, letting his fingers graze spines and covers. One volume, worn and leather-bound, seemed to call to him. When he opened it, the pages were filled with blank spaces and annotations written in a hand that felt unmistakably familiar, his own. Inside the front cover, a note read, Some knowledge can only be acquired by walking the paths you feared. Some truths can only be understood through reflection. What you carry now is your compass. Use it wisely. He turned the pages slowly, discovering sketches of the forest, the cabin, the symbols, the doorway, and even the crystal orb he now held in his pocket. Every entry traced the progression of thought, fear, and courage, the journey made tangible and permanent. Samuel closed the book gently, pressing it to his chest. The owner watched silently, understanding that this was more than a transaction. Samuel had returned not just from the forest, but from the edge of his own understanding. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. The town thrummed softly with life, the baker calling out fresh loaves, the laughter of children chasing each other through lanes, the distant ringing of a bell. Samuel breathed deeply, feeling the rhythm of the world pulse through him. He walked to a nearby fountain, setting the orb carefully on its edge. The crystal shimmered faintly in sunlight, catching the reflections of the town around him. He traced his fingers along its surface, acknowledging the journey it had accompanied, the mirror, the fog, the doorway, the trials of memory and courage. A soft voice behind him said, "You carry a light few ever see, yet it is your own." Samuel turned to see a young woman, her eyes calm but discerning. She smiled knowingly, as if she recognized the weight he bore and the lessons he had learned. "I've learned," Samuel replied quietly, "that light is not about escaping shadow, but carrying both, and understanding that each step forward matters, even if it is slow." The woman nodded. "Then you are ready to move beyond what has passed and engage fully with what is present." He looked around the town, the small details, the sounds, the textures, all ordinary yet sacred. Each interaction, each moment was a choice, a reflection, a fragment of understanding made tangible. The artifacts he carried, the compass, the locket, the journal, the orb, the letters, were not mere objects but extensions of memory and presence, reminders that life's lessons are earned, not given. Samuel allowed himself a moment of quiet pride, a recognition of resilience and courage. He had faced himself, the forest, and the unknown, and emerged whole. The path ahead was not free of challenge, but it was navigable, illuminated by reflection and understanding. He lifted the orb once more, feeling its pulse in his hand. It was no longer a mystery, no longer a test. It was affirmation, a compass guiding him, a symbol of continuity, a connection between what he had endured and the life that awaited him. He walked on, leaving the fountain behind, each step deliberate, aware, and grounded. The town and its rhythms embraced him, not as a visitor, but as someone who had returned fully present, carrying the weight of shadow and light with grace and intention. Samuel continued through the town streets, the late afternoon sun warming the rooftops and casting long, dappled shadows across the cobblestones. Each step felt deliberate, measured, not from fatigue, but from the awareness of presence, of choice, and of the history he carried within him. The forest, the mist, the mirrors, the doorway, all of it had shaped him. Yet the weight of memory was now a guide rather than a burden. At the corner of a quiet lane, he noticed a weathered wooden bench beneath a spreading maple. Upon it rested a small satchel, unassuming, yet radiating the same quiet significance as the artifacts he had already encountered. Samuel approached, heart steady, and opened it carefully. Inside he found a folded parchment, a silver locket, and a set of small stones engraved with spirals, the familiar symbols of the cabin. The parchment contained a single brief message: remember who you were, who you are, and who you choose to become. Each step forward honors memory. He held the silver locket, recognizing it immediately as the twin of the one he had found in the orchard. Opening it revealed an image of his younger self, sitting on a moss-covered rock in the forest, notebook in hand, surrounded by faintly visible fog. The locket reflected both the innocence he had lost and the wisdom he had gained. Samuel placed the small engraved stones in his palm, letting their warmth sink in. Each one pulsed faintly, not with magic, but with memory, the echoes of choice, courage, and endurance. They were markers, reminders that the forest had been not only a crucible of fear, but also a classroom of insight. He leaned against the bench, gazing at the town square ahead. The light had softened to gold, brushing the rooftops and streets with the warmth of evening. People moved through their routines, merchants packing wares, children chasing each other, the distant ringing of a bell echoing softly. It was ordinary, yet in its ordinariness lay a profound lesson. Life continues, regardless of trials endured, and it is within engagement, awareness, and presence that meaning is renewed. The lessons of the forest crystallized in Samuel's mind. Courage was not absence of fear. It was movement forward despite it. Memory was not a burden. It was the compass of identity. Shadow and light, despair and hope, absence and presence, these were inseparable threads of existence. The artifacts he carried, the items he had collected along his journey, were reminders of that truth. A gentle voice broke his contemplation. "You've come far," it said. Samuel turned to see an elderly man leaning on a carved wooden cane. His eyes held recognition, not of Samuel the traveler, but of Samuel the survivor, the one who had faced trials invisible to most and emerged whole. Samuel nodded. "I've seen much, and yet I'm still here. I think I understand now what the forest wanted me to see." The man smiled faintly. "Understanding is not the same as completion. What you carry now is your preparation, your guide. The town, the people, the future, they will test you differently. But now you have choice, awareness, and memory to navigate them." Samuel exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. The sun dipped lower, casting the maple and the bench in long, quiet shadows. The silver locket felt warm against his chest, the stones steady in his hand, the parchment secure in his satchel. He rose from the bench, feeling lighter, yet grounded. He was not rushing. Each movement was deliberate, conscious, aligned with the lessons learned and the path ahead. The forest, once a place of fear and confusion, had become a metaphor for the choices of life, complex, challenging, but ultimately navigable. As he stepped into the street leading toward the heart of the town, Samuel allowed himself a quiet reflection. The trials had revealed his limits and strengths alike, teaching him patience, courage, and the value of memory. The artifacts he carried were no longer mysterious. They were talismans of insight, proof of endurance and guidance for the steps yet to come. He walked steadily, the town alive around him, aware of each sound, each movement, each shadow and light. The past had shaped him, the present embraced him, and the future, uncertain yet promising, awaited his conscious engagement. For the first time, Samuel felt entirely ready, not just to continue his journey, but to live fully, with awareness, memory, and courage intact. The streets of the town grew quieter as Samuel moved toward the eastern edge, where the sun touched rooftops in amber light. The warmth was comforting, but it also highlighted the shadows, the alleys, the silent corners, the spaces where uncertainty lingered. Samuel walked with a steady pace, each step deliberate, conscious of the balance between presence and memory, shadow and light. Along the path, he discovered a modest wooden crate tucked beneath a low wall, partially covered with fallen leaves. It bore no markings, yet Samuel instinctively knew it was significant. Kneeling, he lifted the lid to reveal its contents, a bundle of letters, a small brass telescope, and a sealed envelope addressed in careful, flowing handwriting. He untied the bundle first. The letters were written by a stranger he had never met, chronicling moments of quiet observation and reflection about life, courage, and endurance. The words resonated with him deeply, echoing lessons he had internalized in the forest and the town alike. Next, he lifted the telescope, polished brass reflecting the dying sunlight. It was functional but delicate, a tool to extend sight, to survey distant horizons. Samuel understood it as a symbol. Insight and foresight were essential companions, allowing one to navigate both the immediate and the unknown. Finally, he broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside was a single page, its message concise but profound. Every journey concludes not with a destination, but with awareness. You carry the past, the lessons, and the artifacts. Use them wisely. The path forward is yours to shape. Samuel held the note in his hands, feeling the truth of its words settle into him. The journey had been long, filled with mirrors, fog, whispers, and tests of courage. Each artifact he had encountered, the journal, the locket, the orb, the stones, and now the telescope, had been a guide, an extension of his own consciousness. He rose, cradling the telescope carefully, and walked to the edge of the hill overlooking the town. From this vantage, he could see the rooftops, the winding streets, the townspeople moving in ordinary rhythms. In the distance, the forest lay in shadow, a reminder of trials past and lessons learned. The brass telescope allowed him to bring the forest into sharp focus, distant yet present. Samuel studied the contours of the trees, the mist lingering faintly in hollows, and the faint path he had once traversed. The forest seemed less threatening now, less alien. It had been a teacher, not an enemy, revealing both fear and courage, memory and presence. A gentle wind rustled the letters in his satchel. He paused, realizing that the correspondence, the telescope, and all other artifacts were not merely reminders. They were tools. They would guide him in choices yet to come, offering clarity when uncertainty threatened to overwhelm. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the town. Samuel inhaled deeply, sensing the rhythm of life around him. Children's laughter carried faintly, a dog barked in the distance, and the faint chime of a bell echoed from the town square. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life, but he now perceived them with heightened awareness. Conscious of their value, their fragility, and their constancy, he set the telescope aside, knowing its purpose was fulfilled for the moment. The letters he tucked back into the crate, each a fragment of wisdom waiting for attentive hands. The sealed envelope he placed in his journal, alongside the other lessons and reflections he had collected along the way. Samuel's gaze lingered on the horizon, the forest behind, the town before. The path he had walked, the trials endured, and the artifacts collected, all had guided him to this moment of clarity. Fear no longer dominated, memory no longer constrained, courage no longer hesitated. He felt a quiet affirmation of readiness. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it fully conscious, fully present, and fully grounded. The journey had been transformative, and the artifacts, the tangible echoes of lessons learned, were proof. With one last glance at the fading light over the rooftops and the forest's edge, Samuel stepped down from the hill, moving toward the heart of the town. Each footfall was deliberate, conscious, and filled with the knowledge that the path forward was his own to shape. Samuel walked into the town square as dusk settled over the rooftops, the sky painted in hues of rose and violet. The day's warmth lingered in the stones beneath his feet, carrying with it the ordinary rhythm of life. People moved with calm purpose, merchants closing their stalls, children chasing shadows, neighbors greeting one another with familiar ease. Samuel felt both a participant and an observer, fully present, yet quietly aware of the journey that had brought him here. Near the center of the square, a weathered fountain gurgled softly, water catching the last light of the sun. On its edge rested the collection of artifacts he had gathered. The journal, the locket, the crystal orb, the stones, the letters, the brass telescope, and the folded notes. Each held lessons, memories, and guidance. Each had been a step in the forest's test, a fragment of the journey through shadow and light. He knelt beside the fountain, taking the artifacts in his hands one by one. The journal was first. Its pages bore the chronicle of his trials, reflections, and discoveries. Every word, once a record of fear and confusion, now read as a testament to resilience and insight. He traced the handwriting with his fingers, feeling the rhythm of his thoughts and choices. The locket and the orb followed. The locket carried a memory of his younger self, a reminder of innocence, courage, and the continuity of identity. The orb pulsed faintly in his palm, no longer mysterious, but a symbol of awareness and presence. He had learned to hold both the tangible and the abstract with equal attention. The engraved stones were next, each marked with a spiral. They represented cycles, choices, and the echoes of courage. Samuel had carried them through fear, reflection, and decision. Now they rested in his hand as reminders that lessons endured when acknowledged and integrated. The letters, neatly folded, bore words of observation, wisdom, and encouragement. Though written by others and himself, they all resonated with the same truth. Understanding comes not from avoidance, but from engagement and reflection. Each artifact, though seemingly small, had guided him toward a profound awareness of life's intricacies. Samuel rose, holding the items lightly. The fountain's water reflected the twilight sky, and for a moment he saw himself mirrored, not the hiker who had vanished into the forest, nor the man who had wandered lost in mist, but someone wholly integrated, aware, reflective, and present. He carefully arranged the artifacts on the fountain's edge, leaving them in a gentle display, a record of the journey, a testament to learning, and a guide for any who might follow. They were no longer burdens. They were markers of insight, woven into the rhythm of the world rather than apart from it. A soft murmur of voices drew his attention. Townspeople had gathered nearby, observing without intrusion, drawn to the quiet ritual of acknowledgement and closure. Samuel understood their presence not as judgment, but as witness, affirming that the path he had walked was real, transformative, and meaningful. The wind carried the scents of evening, fresh bread, damp earth, and faint smoke from chimneys. Each inhalation grounded him, connecting memory with presence, shadow with light, trial with resolution. He had faced the unknown, navigated fear, and returned not diminished but whole. Samuel allowed himself a final reflection. Courage is not absence of doubt. Wisdom is not absence of challenge, and peace is not absence of struggle. Life is the accumulation of these lessons, and integration of them is the gift of consciousness. He turned from the fountain and walked slowly through the square, the townspeople now dispersing, leaving the square to its gentle quiet. Samuel felt the weight of memory, artifacts, and insight transform into clarity. Each step forward was deliberate, filled with understanding, awareness, and readiness to engage with life fully. The forest was behind him, the town embraced him, and the path ahead was open. He was no longer running from anything. He carried shadow and light together, the artifacts as symbols of lessons earned, and a mind fully attuned to presence. Samuel paused at the square's edge, looking once more at the fountain. Its gentle flow mirrored his own steady rhythm, reflection, awareness, continuity. He smiled quietly, stepping into the evening with calm resolve. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, not as a man fleeing, nor as a man broken, but as one fully alive, grounded and conscious.